Gaspar. And here we have with us, very fortunate, all the way from North Carolina, Rick Black, who is a volunteer director of the national nonprofit called the Americans Against Abusive Probate Guardianship. And they provide free services to educate the public about issues with guardianship, advocate for those being appointed into or involved involuntarily to guardianship, and lobby for probate reform legislation at the state and national level. Thank you so much, Rick, for coming all the way to our studios, because our audience definitely needs to learn from you and relate to what you've not only gone through in the past, but how you're working so very hard to help others, unfortunately, in your situation.
Thank you, Vivian. It's great to be here.
Welcome.
So, what is guardianship?
Guardianship, it's when the court gets involved in your life. Namely, it's called different things in different jurisdictions, but it's usually a probate court, sometimes called a family court. But it's when you turn to the court to give someone official, full control over your decisions, your rights, and your estate. And in all cases, it will involve lawyers and judges and state oversight with that ruling.
So this only happens when that family member is too old to take care of themselves, or they're incapacitated in some way.
That's correct, Ron, but it can happen to young adults as well as old. Someone, and sometimes it's quite arbitrary, can make the decision that you have become incapacitated due to injury or illness. Mm-hmm. Guardianships are usually focused on those with wealth. We see from time to time the lower income people, maybe with $50,000 of net worth, $20,000 of net worth. Okay. But the cost of a guardianship and the leverage gained from a guardianship, you normally see folks with a net worth of $100,000 to $10 million.
Got it.
What you had mentioned previously is a cottage industry of guardians being appointed who aren't even related to the individual in question.
Sadly, what we see is a broad diversity of engagement with law enforcement and designated elder protective services. There's the National Adult Protective Services Organization, which is a non-governmental organization that's funded by the federal government that works hand in hand at the county level and the state level to protect our elderly. Those over 65 are protected by a group called Elder Protective Services.
So people are trying to take advantage of these handicap or aging people. These are companies or family members or individuals. How much is this happening? How prevalent is this right now?
It's very prevalent. The National Center for State Courts, which is an organization in Williamsburg, Virginia, that was established as an ad hoc analyst of the actions that take place in the family and probate court system. They estimate that 1.3 million adults are under guardianship in the United States today, and roughly 85% of those are seniors, those over 65.
And how many are deemed predatory, where people are taking advantage of the financial aspect?
Our estimates within Americans Against Abusive Probate Guardianship is somewhere between 7 and 10% are actually done on a predatory basis to use guardianship to exploit the estate. It's originated in an involuntary basis with a predatory or fraudulent initiative.
And what percent of the estate could be diminished in that way?
A great question, Ron. When these efforts are taken on, their intent is to completely drain the estate. There's actually fallout here that your listeners need to be aware of, because their intent is to create conflict. Control of the body, dead or alive, is the essence of initiating the conflict, which then gets these parties into the court system. Once it starts, they will not let go until that estate has been completely drained.
Give us an example, please. What do you mean by conflict?
Like what has this happened to?
Well, I'm a victim myself.
Is that why you got involved?
Absolutely. In summer of 2013, we discovered that my father-in-law, who had retired in Las Vegas, he had been living with a woman that we had all known for 30 years. They weren't married. They had segregated assets. That meaning she had her bank accounts, he had his bank accounts. She owned her home. He paid rent to her. She had a car. He had a car. And it's not a common law state. She stole $220,000 from him.
How did she do that?
Well, he had Alzheimer's,
I
and
see.
we didn't realize that we knew he was 80 years old and he was starting to slow down, but the Alzheimer's wasn't known. It had never been talked about. In fact, we found out later that she was doing a very good job of deceiving the family on really what was going on in Las Vegas. Fortunately, my father-in-law had prepared for his aging. He had put my wife on all of his bank accounts. She was the pay-on-death beneficiary of all of his assets. She was the executor of his will. And we had weekly contact with him via phone and spent at least a vacation a year with him. So we weren't estranged in any way.
So the protection mechanisms, repeat them again. It's
Well,
have a signer on the bank account.
In this case, it was joint holders on the bank accounts so that you can monitor those statements and understand
Electronically or
transactions. That's correct, electronically. It's be the executor of the will, have a will, number
Have a
one.
will or a
But
trust.
also, trusts are secondary and they're rather expensive to put together. You'll spend $2,000-$3,000 to put together a trust. And there's another weakness with trusts, Ron, that we got to be aware of, and I'll spend.
Let's talk about that in a
we'll
moment.
get that in a second. But executor on the will, 100% executor or beneficiary of that will. So it was very clear who my father-in-law trusted and who he expected his estate to go to.
Right.
In our case, after we determined the theft and went and called him and had a discussion about, hey, this money's missing. Do you know what's going on, what has occurred? The landlord was eavesdropping in the discussion. She immediately started screaming at him, you brought that money out here for us, and then it eventually cascaded into, you come get your father, I'm done with him.
What about, did your wife have a power of attorney as well?
She did not.
Would that have helped the situation?
As it turned out, it would not.
Okay.
But it's
and-
good
and
to get if
it's
they're
a-
in capacity.
yeah, my guidance.
And a living will, of course.
Yeah, no, my guidance to anyone with aging parents is that you must get a durable power of attorney. And that gives you the ability to access their bank accounts, to make decisions for them if they have a traffic accident and they're injured or if they have illness. You also want to have a healthcare surrogate or an advance directive, healthcare power of attorney, so that when they become incapacitated, you as their designated loved one can make decisions about their health care. Oftentimes what we see in the court system is predatory parties will step in and say, well, really with the durable power of attorney, your loved one only trusted you to make financial decisions for them, but not medical decisions for them. They jump in as a guardian of the person, and then the fleecing begins through the court system.
How is this different in various states? Because I know you said this is not just state by state, but sometimes county by county. So are there any commonalities you can mention since we're seeing throughout the whole country?
Well, probate and family court is consistently designed across the country. How it is managed is very different. And that's where the problem comes in.
So can people do this on their own, like get these documents signed and notarized at their bank on their own, or should they be consulting a professional or your organization or an attorney? What's the...
My guidance on durable powers of attorney is that you go to an attorney and have them draft the agreements. You can easily get those agreements off the internet. There's plenty of forms. They're very, very standard. And you can go to the bank and get them notarized and executed.
So you don't have to have an attorney to assist
Right,
with
but the
this.
concern
That's correct.
But the concern I've had is some of these forms you get online, they're state clauses that may not survive a conflict. So if you get online documents, how do you know it's ironclad, it's written properly for your state or county?
Ron, it's a great comment, and that's why I recommend go to an attorney. My caution to your listeners, though, is elder law attorneys, is an area with a lot of latitude, and it's sort of the Wild West. And the thing that I see too often is family members will go to an elder law attorney to have them draft up a trust agreement or a durable power of attorney agreement. They don't really understand what it should say. They put their full trust in an attorney, and then the attorney drafts an agreement that allows him to step in as a guardian should something happen down the road. So you really want to get yourself educated with a lawyer, but also do a lot of comparison with peers to understand exactly
Right.
what your risk reward is.
So learning this, is there a book that you would recommend or a website?
I don't. My recommendation is to go to our website, which is Americans Against Abusive Probate Guardianship,
Americans Against
AAAPG.
Abusive Home Guardian.
Americans Against Abusive Probate Guardianship
Okay.
.net.
.net.
AAAPG.net.
Okay, so I need to ask, since obviously this is a victimization situation, and I would love to know if any of the people who've perpetrated this, do they get arrested? Do they face consequences? Has any of the legal arm, police or anyone of that nature gotten involved to rescue the people who are victimized?
Sadly, no, Vivian. The percentages of convictions for elder abuse are extremely low. I want to alarm your viewers because I want to shock them into action. I've investigated over 400 fraudulent guardianship cases around the country. What you see, not one, actually, let me take it back. One of those cases has actually yielded a criminal arrest and has yet to yield a criminal conviction.
Why?
Because
Why one out of 400?
Law enforcement doesn't engage in this area. I've talked with sheriffs around the country, I've talked with district attorneys around the country. Our law enforcement experts deal with violent crime. When someone is murdered, when someone is beat up, when someone is raped, those are the cases that they focus their resources on. Reporting the theft of an 80-year-old person by their son or their daughter, or even, even further out, their guardian, it just isn't an arena where law enforcement engages. It's a sad reality.
But what about when you said that these guardians, who could be potentially strangers to this elderly individual, now withholds the family member having access to them? Isn't that abusive? So why wouldn't there be a step in by the police or any other judicial arm to stop that kind of an abuse simply because someone's aged? I mean, you help children under the other organizations. You mentioned there's organizations to help the elderly. Why isn't something being more proactively done, since this is criminal? Abuse is criminal action, correct?
Vivian, everything you're saying is correct, but the reality is our society, look, I'm a Christian man. I wear my faith deep in my soul, but I also recognize our society today really doesn't care about the elderly. There's a lot of rhetoric on it, but if you look at child protective services, if you look at federal laws that protect children, those could easily translate to the elderly, particularly the elderly that have become vulnerable due to disease or illness or accident. It doesn't translate. 1986, the Associated Press did a study on 2,200 guardianships around the country. They did a series in the New York Times and other newspapers. It was appalling what they learned, the abuse that went on, the lack of oversight in these guardians once the probate court, the judge, assigned a third party, oftentimes a stranger, to protect that individual. This is the most vulnerable in our society, and judges step in to give a third party power over them and then don't demand oversight and accountability.
So that's the key. Oversight and accountability is what we have to start establishing.
Absolutely.
So families need to kind of like treat their loved ones as a business. You have to have contracts in place between family members, and it's got to be enforceable.
Ron, that's a great idea. Very difficult to put in practice. Most families won't sit down and have that intentional of a discussion. My guidance to family members is have the discussion on who of your children. Look at history. Cain and Abel was the first family fight. Okay?
Didn't
the
go
beginning of time. We've
2,000 years ago.
That's right. We've had issues. Well, more than that. I mean, this
been a
goes back
while.
to the Old
That's because they
Testament.
didn't hire an attorney.
Please don't say that, Ron. But no, family dysfunction is normal. But that's why we as parents make an assessment of our children, of our siblings, so that we decide who is best able to protect me, who is best able to care for me. Those documents, once they're drafted, and my personal guidance to all families is don't go to the court. That environment is far too unpredictable. So execute your durable power of attorney, execute your advanced health directives, grant it to the person you trust the most, put in a secondary, a successor, so that you have some backstop protections, but do everything up front to ensure that you never have to give those decisions over to a third party. Because go ahead.
I was just going to say is we need to cut you off because this is such an important topic. Who in our viewing audience doesn't have an elderly person in their life that they care about, they love, or at least friendly with? And the information that you learn here, you not only help your family, but the people you're in contact with. So we did something very, very special. We are freezing here, so we can ask you to stay tuned and come back for the second episode, which is actually the second part of this valuable subject that you need to hear about. Stay tuned for part 2 of guardianship abuse of the elderly. And returning will be Rick Black,
Rick Black
and
and Juliet Farley.
Juliet Fairley.